I'm Cadence Diffuse, and this is Busybody Podcast. Today I'm speaking with Alex Auder about her book, Don't Call Me Home. It's an incredible read. It's a memoir. We talk about all kinds of very New York-based things, including a lot about how to do yoga in a world after pretty much every yogi elder has been Me Too'd. We also talk a lot about our moms. So if you have a mom and have a difficult mom, I think you'll enjoy this conversation. I so appreciated your book. Can you give us the quick overview for people that just don't know you at all? Because I feel like this is a bit of like a New York insider's little conversation here.
Yeah, sorry.
You literally grew up in the Chelsea Hotel. We should say that.
Yeah.
And when did you leave? Like, just give us a little overview of like the time period.
Yeah, it was my mom was in labor in the hotel, and then I grew up. I mean, if you read the book, you'll see, but there was a period where we moved around a bunch, my mom and I. She and my dad left each other, and we did we had a many-year road trip, but then landed back at the Chelsea in like 1980-ish. And my sister, and I was around 9 then, and my sister was born when I was 11, who's a famous actress, or famous-ish, Gabby Hoffman. And so the book is about a lot of things, but the majority of it is the body is the Chelsea Hotel, which I loved, the building of the Chelsea in our apartment. And then the internal space is basically like living in a small space with a, extremely high maintenance person, Viva, my mother, who was her name was Viva Superstar. Warhol named her. So she had been stopped doing the movie. Her last movie was in 1968. Mm-hmm. So when I was born, she was a writer, a painter, an artist living in, this apartment that we had really cheap rent and whatever. If you don't know about the Chelsea, you can look it up. But it's now bought by made into, a rich fancy hotel. But you can buy a cocktail named after my mother for $35. The Viva Superstar. And then I basically left the Chelsea when I went to Bard College, where I met my husband, and really had always wanted to be a writer. That's what I studied. When I moved back to New York briefly after college, I was quite depressed and unsure what to do. And I had already gone to Jivamukti a couple times as a teenager, but I walked back into Jivamukti and thus ruined my life. Because then I basically never stopped doing yoga until recently. So that's the story in a nutshell. But the book just takes place from that, like birth to leaving home time. It's really a coming of age with a pretty intense person. And the downtown New York scene of 70s and 80s.
Which is amazing to read about kind of as just a background setting.
Yeah.
The theater company down the street and just the...
Oh, yeah, the Squat Theater. They were so great, yeah.
And that whole area also being, much more gritty than it is now and colorful and all that kind of stuff, these euphemisms. Well, how are you? Thank you for finally...
I'm good. It's nice to see your face.
You too.
How's the movement world? As you know, I barely move now.
I mean, we're all the worst for it.
I know. You're the worst. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Because trust me, I thought maybe I'd be better if I didn't move, so that's not the case either.
Yeah, exactly.
They both suck.
It's true.
I would though, just if I was rich and I had somebody like just every morning just lead me to. I know what I'm saying. This is totally doable, but I want to be like transported to the place and just do like a simple weightlifting routine. That would be my happiest,
I mean, sign up for my classes. They're self-paced.
I know. I really should do that. It's just, I hate doing it by alone.
Well, we can trade. Oh my God. We can just like every other day, like you show up on my screen, I'll show up on your screen. We'll lead each other through a thing.
It's like I realize that I like to be, I'm the teacher's pet and I like to be in a group because it's performative for me. It is entertaining. I used to always go to the pier over in the West Village, by where I used to live in the good old days. And I was super fit and I would bike after teaching Yakula. And then I'd be like, I'm going to do some fancy stuff. It was literally just to show off, even though I didn't tell myself that at the time. And at the peak of my fitness, which is, after my first kid, before my second kid, when I was taking the, multi-intenso classes, the David Regolin classes,
Sure.
I actually remember this one moment where I did like, it was like in a handstand, I slowly like reverse type down, and I was not that great at it, but it was like I was in this thing where I was like starting to get good at it. Then I never progressed after that. And then like my feet hovered from my doing hands. I was like, oh my god! And then I heard this clapping, and David Regolin walked up just as I was doing it, and I was like, yes! And like I still remember that moment. That was like my peak fitness moment. It went downhill from that moment.
I mean, that's an amazing moment though, because you had the best audience you could possibly have for that.
It was incredible. And then like honestly now it's like one of the reasons why I just don't even care about yoga is because I'm so out of shape and so unfit yoga wise that it's like there's I realized that my only interest was to show off. Like I have no interest whatsoever. I like go in the back of the class and I'm like okay, lift your arm. Like
well, that's a great segue into, like, before your book came out, I wanted to have you on the podcast. We will talk about your book because I know that you haven't talked about it enough. But I wanted to ask you this a long time ago, kind of, I guess, like, in the pandemic, it just felt like the entire yoga world was imploding, not just because all these studios were closing, like major kind of communities and studios, but also because of Me Too, it felt like every leader in the yoga world, every kind of forefather, and even in Kundalini, foremother, was being taken down. And I had this moment of like, can we still practice yoga? Like what? It's a weird thing to do a passed down practice. And I say this also as a dancer, which is all like passed down information physically from one body to another. This kind of lineage. And then we're embodying that in our bodies and we're teaching it to other people. I don't teach yoga, but Mr. Pilates borrowed so much from yoga. I often in my classes basically teach a yoga sequence and be like, we're being OG with Pilates. I'm just borrowing this straight from a yoga class, you know?
Right.
What is your relationship to yoga as someone who I think many people rightly so think of as being like one of really the founding New York City community members of yoga?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that is one of the reasons why I stopped. And it's strange because I was like, during Me Too, like not yoga Me Too, but regular Me Too, I was almost like oppositional, like not with really obvious things like Harvey Weinstein, but sometimes I was like, come on, that's not a Me Too, like kind of being just like a French, how like the French women wrote a letter, like, it's okay to rape women, like, you know what I'm saying? There's like all these famous French ladies who are like anti-Me Too, but I was, I guess it's funny. I guess I was talking about that stuff. I feel like it was before the pandemic, but I can't remember the timeline anymore when I was kind of like, in a way I felt like Instagram was a very useful thing at that time because it was a way of discussing, and I felt like I was honing in some like critical writing and like kind of figuring out how I felt about the abusive patriarchy of yoga and matriarchy, but mostly patriarchy, but for sure matriarchy as well. And it did seem like basically there was no movement. I did feel it very somatically, like much more so than any like sexual trysts I'd been in as a young, because I always say like anytime I've ever had sex has been a Me Too, like, so like be much more intensely than actual sexual and intimate relations with the opposite sex because I happen to be straight. I felt yoga was much more triggering in that way. So like any shape or movement, I was like, and I still feel like that. I'm like, oh, this, and I would almost have like a triggering response to being, which is so strange because I was such a proponent of hands-on adjustment, and I myself gave such deep adjustments. And now it's like, because I still dabble, when I teach this retreat in Costa Rica with the women who I love, Skylar and Nikki, anytime they lead like a bound twist, for example, it's like, and I'm gonna just be bold here and say I'm being raped. Like I'm like, ew, no. Like, why would I want to squish myself up into that weird position? And then thinking about like the men who would like get on top of me and shove my hands on my ankles, and so I did kind of throw the baby out with the bath water. And in a strange way, I'm trying to figure out how to return to it because I do realize, okay, I was actually in better shape. And by better shape, I don't mean aesthetically. I mean my lungs were healthier. I had more of a sense of, I had less anxiety. You know, the breath work is so lovely, and there's so many great somatic exercises. So yeah, I'm like, I should probably try some yoga again. and but I get really triggered in class, like, and I get really annoyed with other people. You know, I look around and I see the women doing the stupid crescent lunges, and I almost have to like put blinders on, and or I have to like let myself go like this all the time. Like it just annoys me so much.
And that's the other people doing things seemingly with no awareness of like the history now.
Yeah, and it's just stupid to be judgmental. What do I care? And like, do they need an awareness? No. You know what I mean? And like their bodies might be just fine. But there's just something about looking at the shapes that for so many years, like I taught and then tried to like reteach and tried to adjust the way maybe we approach these shapes, we as a whole. And then I just like go to a class and I'm like, and there's that ridiculous hypermobile, like shapes that's exploiting that woman's hypermobility. And I shouldn't give, why do I care? Like she'll be fine, she'll either figure it out or won't figure it out. But for some reason I just get really, you know, I'm probably still like bitter and jealous of the fact that I can't do it anymore either.
I mean, I think you have every reason to be triggered by those things.
Yeah.
I think the yoga world is so, I don't know, it's so often problematic. I'm of a generation that I was, I guess, introduced to yoga right when it was starting to like really boom, you know, in like the mid 90s or something, where there were yoga studios starting to pop up everywhere. And actually, I was just thinking about this the other day. I used to take class at Baron Baptiste's studio in Boston, and I'm like, has he been Me Too'd? It seems like he would have been.
Actually, I know. I feel like he managed to like get away. He managed to be okay.
Yeah, it was like very obvious he was having sex with all of his instructors.
I know. I don't know how he got away with it. There's a few people who seem to have come out unscathed, which I'm like, interesting.
Yeah, exactly. He's very charismatic. I used to have a giant T-shirt literally with him on it doing a very impressive up jog that I wore all the time, you know.
That's so funny. I think I actually know that T-shirt you're talking about.
Yeah, it was an iconic image of him.
Did he was always Boston, right? Because what's the place in LA that's like that? Was that Brian Kest or something?
Yeah.
There's like a Los Angeles similar thing that I remember going to. It was the first time I ever was introduced to the LA vibe of yoga, which obviously is multifaceted, but there's a very like, you know, it's very there's a big sector that's like super, I don't know what, I have no idea what it's like now, but it was like power, hot, flow, and like people would literally walk out before Shavasana or they start doing crunches in the middle, you know?
Yeah.
And I never seen that before. And I was like horrified, you know? I was like, oh my God, what is this? The devil's work. Yeah, but I feel like I don't know, nothing. Maybe Brian Kest is fine too. Yeah, I have no idea what the New York, Brooklyn vibe with yoga is now at all. Like I don't know what people are teaching, like what the
I don't know that much either because Kula really became my home studio, and then now I live in Coney Island and I'm so far away from them. So the last time I was there, I think was when I went to your opening party.
Oh right.
Sometimes I stream Kevin's classes. Kevin Baker, shout out.
I love Kevin Baker as a person, and I've still never taken one of his classes. I kind of left when he started teaching, but he was a student of mine, and I adore him, and I hear he's amazing, and everybody loves him, and his classes are like...
I used to take Erin Dudley's Honey Float every Friday night for like 15 years, literally, like just without
she's
missing
the best.
it.
And Nikki still, when I take Nikki's class, Nikki V, the co-owner of Kula, I love, like that feels, her classes do feel amazing on my body. And I feel very like able to take care of myself, you know, in them. But yeah, I think because of all the ego that's wrapped into yoga, it's like I remember when I was young, really much younger, way younger, and I had my first studio. This was like, in the late 90s in upstate New York. And I would see a woman of my age come in, I was in my 20s, and who was like, did everything differently, was like adjusting all the clothes and would really annoy
Yeah.
me. And I'd be like, oh, she's so persnickety, like, whatever. She's so precious about her body. Ugh. Um, like, and I like, and she's so like out of it, like she doesn't know these shapes. And and now now I feel like that woman, and I wish I could like look at me and be like, I did that, like I floated down, I did standing split, which
Yeah,
like it's
yeah.
so dumb that I care, but I wish I could wear some chain that was like done that, choosing not to.
Yeah,
Can't
yeah.
do it can't really do it anymore anyway, but I did once do it.
I mean that I think is I had Kula taught me how to do yoga without hurting myself. And
Yeah.
and up till then because I was a dancer and I was really young and also just like clearly really into moving my body and testing my boundaries, I was all about like what can I do? And yoga is so strange how it does feel very hierarchical in the movement, that you're always kind of
Yeah.
building your ability. And at the same point, you're being asked to literally union,
I
dive
know.
into yourself, find this internal balance, be present to yourself. I think in the past, I thought that was just like a really interesting, like a Buddhist koan little mind twist of like
Mhm.
learning to back off and be literally present with yourself. Now I also feel like it's because it was developed by a lot of men who are kind of sociopaths and narcissistic.
Totally.
And so,
Definitely.
yeah, I have like very different feelings
I
now
think there's a
about.
deep, deep sadomasochism in it. And
Yeah.
it's different than exercise, like exercise, lifting weights or doing a bike ride. Like obviously just now did a bike ride, you're biking up the hill, it's painful,
Hmm.
but it's such a different kind of pain.
Hmm.
Um, and the endorphin rush is really just raw and simple, I feel like, from doing, let's say, a challenging bike ride or doing weightlifting, which that pain, the pain of lifting, when I say weightlifting, I don't mean like, I
Yeah.
just mean whatever, like easy shit.
Resistance.
Resistance, yeah. Um, to me, that's always feels incredible. Like the burn of that is always like feels very therapeutic and
Hmm.
healing to me. And I think that like in the old days, I used to stay in aesthetic shape through yoga. And in order for yoga to serve that purpose, I mean, like totally superficially, like six
Hmm.
pack abs and whatever, like a certain weight,
Hmm.
at least for my body, it was this such a strenuous kind of yoga that if I were to use that to me, and now when I say stay in shape, I don't necessarily mean weight wise or
Hmm.
six pack, because that's not going to happen in my body now. I just mean like um, feeling good. You know what I mean? Having some muscle tone, feeling
Yeah.
good, and maintaining the weight I am now, which is heavier than I used to be. I could never use yoga for that. You know what I mean? Because I can't, the
Right.
joints can't do that, right? So it's like a thing where like the joint simply cannot function that way. Whereas I feel like other simpler exercises, you always can do it. You can do
Hmm.
a deadlift. You know what I mean? You
It's
can
true. Yeah.
do a bike ride.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true. That's
I mean,
so
that's an
interesting.
able-bodied way of thinking. Sorry, I know some people can't do any of that, and they'd have to approach it in a different way. Just
But what
throwing
you're
that out
basically
there.
saying, I mean, I
Yeah.
think we could qualify that as like the intensity that yoga would ask to literally kind of physically change your body is
Yeah.
like the pretzel stuff. It's these deep holds. It's like it's
Repetitive vinyasa. Yeah.
yeah,
Yes,
which
people
means you're
and
jumping
body
back into
weightlifting,
planks.
body
You're
weightlifting, which is a
yeah,
huge weight to lift. Yeah,
yeah,
which is what I
yeah,
noticed too. Like even crow pose. Like I did headstand when I was just doing teaching routines this week, and I was like, man, whoa, that's intense.
yeah, yeah. I do still think
So
about
I
how
don't know why I'm saying that or like what the purpose of saying that is, but I guess yeah, just thinking about what it asks of you and like and what the purpose is, right? But if we think of yoga as you know, even saying this is loaded, the original intents, because, what are the original intents of, what's the original intent of yoga? But if we go back to the Vedas, to that kind of thing, yeah, then yoga is amazing, right? Like if we think of just like what it offers in terms of exploring the breath and all of the science and movement world knows now in terms of how potent breath work is.
And it's a container, and I think that's like
Yeah.
that's what I get out of yoga is like there's a certain level of physical intensity that keeps my mind engaged,
Definitely.
whereas just, a more completely breath-based meditation or something, I might really be struggling to be there. But
It's true.
going through the movement, I'm
Yeah.
trying to listen, I'm trying to integrate, that kind of like puts my brain on a little track. And then I have these movements like half moon or something where I always find like you really find out, am I in the room or not? Can I really
Yeah.
connect
Yeah.
to my foot here? Can I really feel the inside of my
Yes.
pelvis? That to me has kept, like, I decided not to do a yoga teacher training because when I was younger, I just was like, I don't want to hustle this spiritual place for me, like I just don't want
Mm-hmm.
to ask for money around this. And so I've stayed with yoga being like a real spiritual practice for me for a long
Mm-hmm.
time, but have not really had a practice since the pandemic because of all these obstacles and just like this, it's become even more challenging to find a studio that has a little bit more awareness of like
Mm-hmm.
these elements, these
Yeah.
lineages,
Yeah.
to make it still feel like a healing, nurturing place.
Yeah. It seems very from the little I know just from looking at Instagram or something, yeah, I can't really pinpoint. And maybe there is no direction or vibe of the yoga world that you slip in, which is fine, but it's like, basically everything I romanize at, like I see the Sky King ladies, and I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, Naveen, like this version of Naveen stuff, and that, I just like everything has some association to me.
Yeah, I bet for you.
Um,
You've really seen like a whole trajectory for sure.
yeah, yeah, and I don't know, I guess I'm just a bitch or something. And I'm like,
No.
yeah, that's
I think
true.
you're smart
Um,
and observant.
but yeah, I also love, yeah, I like this kind of dumbness and like being anonymous in a regular old, circuit training class.
Hmm.
And by dumbness, I just mean like it requires less of me to just be like, all right, do this silly movement, this sumo in 30 seconds, ding, and the ad music and all that.
I mean, maybe it's just the nature of life. You know what I mean? Everybody has to go through their movement journey. And, obviously, as we all get older, we have a broader perspective to look back on and more information to make fun of people and be bitter and poo poo everything.
That is the point.
Yes, yes. The older you get, the more bitter the taste.
The more fodder you have to make fun of people.
Exactly, exactly.
But this is kind of a good segue into your book. I mean, you were introduced to yoga before yoga was linked into capitalism as much, like when it was
Totally.
this fringe thing. In my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
I think of like the era that you were getting into yoga is like the era when like the Beatles were getting into it. Kind of, I think it was a little bit after them, but like that
Yeah,
kind of,
I mean
like,
the Beatles. Yeah,
traveling
we're.
gurus wandering around.
I know it's true. It's true. It was it was a little bit before me for sure in the '60s, but for sure I was more closely linked to that, I would say, than I am to, to Brian Kest's hot power yoga in LA.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think I was introduced to it through my mother, who was, whether she knew it or not, probably introduced to it by the Beatles. You know what I mean? It's not like she would have associated it with that, but she obviously was of that era.
Mm-hmm.
And she had this crazy guru who's dead, Swami Muktananda, and his predecessor is Guru Mai, who was quite famous. But there's a great, that's so entertaining, New Yorker takedown of that whole scene, and really wild, involving guns and all sorts of things. But that Siddha Yoga ashram, tons of celebrities went there. I think you can still go there, but you have to have like special permission. But Guru Mai was this gorgeous, very like gender non-conforming woman. I mean, I think she definitely identified as a woman, but she had this tomboyish quality, absolutely stunning woman who was, and Muktananda was her mentor, her guru. And I mean, I would sometimes go to those satsangs and, path hundreds and hundreds of people, fancy. They are on somewhat what started like, what do they call it? Like spiritual chic, like, really fancy mala beads and pashminas in the boutique. Meg Ryan was there. You'd always see some major celebrity there. In Eat, Pray, Love, supposedly it's that guru that the characters, but yeah, they never name Guru Mayu by name. But anyways, the New Yorker article about it is incredible. A big scandal between her and her brother. They were supposed to take over together. Really wild shit. But yeah, Muktananda was basically using his penis to, spread Shaktipat. And, but my mother went, yeah, exactly. The penis is a good Shaktipat spreader. My mother went into the ashram way back then when he was alive, and supposedly, according to her, she couldn't leave for 5 days because she kept like turning into a lion and stuff, Shaktipat, and everyone was jealous because she was having these spiritual awakenings. And then according to my mother, she was like, I gotta get out of here. I've got a kid, and then she brought me to meet him. That's when I got my Shaktipat. And
how old were you at this point?
I was like 5 or 6, and the story goes that like I was like a compulsive masturbator, and I called it. I'm sure that my mother asked this. Who knows? My mother like wanted to know, is it okay that she's masturbating so much, humping things so much? I would like pile up stuffed animals and hump them and hump the side of the couch. And he said, oh yes, it's very natural. It's like rubbing your tummy. So then I would say like to my grandma, like, is it okay if I rub my tummy? And she'd be like, of course, honey. And then I would start humping the side of the couch. I'm sure I knew that there was, that was wrong. But there was some part of me that devilishly wanted to freak her out. And then when I was a teenager, we would visit Guru Mai sometimes when she'd come to New York, and, big, huge events. You get bopped on the head with a peacock feather, all that. And then much later, when I had my own yoga studio and was practicing, I would dabble a little bit because I was always kind of on that search, like, could I have a guru? You know what I mean? Like, well, maybe you'd want that feeling, people faint and stuff. Have you ever been in one of those scenes?
No. I mean, the closest I ever got to that is I did a Om yoga retreat? No.
Yeah.
Omega?
Yeah.
I don't know. They were in a huge hotel in Manhattan when I was a freshman in college, and I did the whole weekend. I was getting up at 4 a.m. to go meditate with the Kundalini people and took class all day, and I met like Desikachar.
Oh yeah, wow, yeah.
And I met like the Jivamukti couple who were like rock stars and like
yeah. Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. That hotel, that huge gathering. I never went to that, but yeah, and all the famous teachers were there. I know just what you're talking about. That's so funny.
Who like. Clearly.
Wasn't it like organized by Yoga Journal or something?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I definitely subscribed to Yoga Journal back in the day.
Yeah.
And I like wept in Rodney Yee's class.
He actually is a great teacher.
He's a great teacher. He talks about food a lot in his classes in a kind of hilarious manner.
Yeah, I always really liked his teaching, but I would dabble in his classes sometimes. In the more recent past, I mean, let's say like 10 years ago in the Hamptons, and that was a royal scene.
I bet.
Yeah. And then, unfortunately, sorry, I'm sure Colleen won't listen to this, but he really lowered himself teaching with his wife. But when he was on his own, they were amazing classes. I know.
That's such good gossip.
Really?
Yeah, they are to me, they're like the OG kind of that like yoga like rock star, like the fact that you could just really become celebrities teaching.
He was the first famous yoga teacher. VHS tapes,
Oh, really?
Yeah. Besides for like, there's that Lilius woman in the 70s. Everyone talks about her. But Rodney, I'd say in the modern world was the first famous guy. And I remember he came to the old Jivamukti to teach a workshop, and even then, and obviously this is pre-internet, any of that stuff, we were like, Rodney Yee. So somehow he transcended through the snail mail days of,
Well, he's a ballet dancer originally, I think. I mean, he's got performance vibes. He's got...
Totally, he's great. I think he's a really great teacher, but like I say, he got pulled to the dark side by the Hamden lady vibe.
Do you remember... Because you just reminded me of that Lilith woman. I took class with this woman who someone I know was recently taking something with her, and I was like, oh my God, she's still teaching things.
Oh, she is?
Her book was like something Lotus at Home in the Muddy Water or something.
Huh. Oh, that is one. But not like Von the Skeletal.
I can't remember. And she was very like restorative before that was a thing. I took literally like a restorative class with her in the 90s.
I think I might know what you're talking about. Judith Lass.
Yes.
Yeah, she's great. Really cool.
Yeah.
She's cool. I like her a lot.
I didn't realize she was still teaching. She seemed...
Yeah, there's some old ladies like that are really great. And like, you know, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen. I mean, she's not totally yoga, but there's some old gals that are still incredible. You know?
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
But yeah, like those scenes of, which I don't know if they're still around. Like I never hear anything about like the hugging mother and all that. Mm-hmm. You know, like there used to be much more of that where you go and you try to, or at least I felt like I was trying to invent a spiritual, you know, ecstasy. Mm-hmm. And it would work sometimes, you know, I would feel it, or especially chanting with Krishna Das. That I do feel like was a real thing, you know, but I think it's scientifically possible that you're just getting, you know, your vagus nerve is so stimulated that you get really high, you know?
Yeah.
But like, you know, when those guys, those Ram Das guys, you know, I'm talking like Krishna Das and Sham Das, he's dead now, but they were all followed. What's his name? Their guru, Ram Dass, or is that the other guru? Who's the Indian guy with the blanket? You know, who's been around? Everybody has him on his altar. You know, with the plaid blanket. I'm gonna tell you. Oh, Neem Karoli Baba.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like when they describe that, I would be like, I want to feel that. You know, they act like the person is magic. You know.
Yeah.
And you're in some sort of, it's like the Wizard of Oz. So I had a period where I wanted to go to India, and like I was like, I'll have that, but I don't know. Something happened. I could care less now. I guess I just don't believe it anymore.
And you never.
But they certainly believe it. I don't think Krishna Das is lying. You know. Right.
Yeah. And you never went to India. You never did like a.
I never went.
After that yoga journal conference thing, I had a actually great spiritual experience in Desikachar's class. He was a lovely teacher, the younger one, who's very obese actually. He's super round. And his class was fantastic. He apparently got Me Too'd for like in the last couple of years.
Wait, did you say he did get Me Too'd?
I think he did. I still am on their newsletter. This is like almost 20 years I've been on the newsletter, getting workshop things that are happening literally in India, because this was me signing up in my freshman year of college. So I'm like, any minute I'm going to go and take their workshop in India. So I still get those.
You still,
And then at some point they had like a apology that went out or something. You know, apparently he was
I think I did hear that too. I did hear that too.
But I have to say, he was an amazing teacher and really like gave me words that like I went to him in such yearning for any guidance at that period of my life, and for many years I just was such a hollow shell, so stressed, just I mean really it's almost a miracle that I didn't have some kind of experience, because I was desperate for like a leader, a guru, like you know. I also was I'm just so not a follower that I think that's also why that never happened.
I really can flip-flop, I feel like, you know. I can like be a complete follower and then I go like totally the opposite direction. Yeah. It's weird. Yeah. But I think you're less of a follower than I am.
I just was always like, I just have always been so skeptical, even when I was a little kid.
And why were you so stressed when you were so young?
Oh, well, talking about your book, in so many ways we've had some very parallel experiences. Yours were kind of the more extreme version, but like artist parents, like zero guidance at home, plenty of love, you know, no shade in that way, lots of love.
Yeah.
But all that kind of chaos and upheaval. Also, my father died when I was a teenager, so that was very devastating, because I also really just like lost a lot of community around me. And then my mom just like didn't know what to do with all that and just let me adult myself when I had no idea what I was doing. So I just was even more.
How did he die?
He died suddenly, just heart failure. So
so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can happen when you're a teenager and one parent dies like that suddenly, you know, the other parent can't handle it. I have a couple of friends who experience that.
Yeah, I mean, my mom in general is not so great at like boundaries. I mean, just like she was the very young mom. Like when I look back, you know, she was like in her, I don't know, mid-30s.
So you related to some of that stuff in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just you're having to like watch your mother and take cues to know like how you would have to react to things, and like you're making these decisions as such a young person, literally like wandering the streets at times. And I loved that juxtaposition of like this really, really intense internal space of the apartment you were living in, and then the New York City, like outside your window, like this incredible
Thanks, I
playground,
like that. Yeah, that's nice to hear that take on it. Yeah.
I mean, literally just, it was so visual, you scaling fences to go places and playing in all these iconic places. And that's a really interesting part about your book, is like your life is literally like you could just be name dropping and you're like in this very iconic moment in New York and literally surrounded by these like iconic people. And yet in the book, you like, we slowly, if people know their art history, you're slowly putting together that your mother-in-law is, or your stepmother is Shirley. Now her name just went out of my head.
Cindy Sherman.
Cindy Sherman, yeah.
Yeah.
Which I'm like slowly picking this. I'm like, oh, she has all these costumes. Oh, she's doing a lot of art. And then I was like, oh my God, is it Cindy Sherman?
Yeah, that's funny. You know, I didn't it's oddly, I guess I did start thinking, but in a weird way, I didn't even think about that I didn't have her last name. Like it wasn't a coy thing until later. I was like, because it just didn't seem in the writing, it wasn't natural to write Cindy Sherman. Do you know what I mean? And so then later I was like, oh, I guess I never really say her last name. I was like, that's fine. People figure it out if they want to figure it out. Yeah. And so I really like that people, you know, then I came to really like that happened, but it wasn't like a conscious thing where I was like, I will not say her last name. It was more that I was keeping it true to the narrator's voice, you know?
Oh, that's amazing. Because I really wondered if your agent or, you know, the publisher had asked you to withhold, because for people that don't know, your mom was a muse of Andy Warhol. Like your household had a lot of really fascinating people that the book could also have been just like a who's who in a lot of ways.
No, totally. And I think, and in certain drafts, there might have been more of that. Like I had these sections where I would put more context, but in the final draft, I was like, I'm just going to assume the reader can look up who they want to look up, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, it just seemed, I wasn't trying to obscure her because it's so easy to find out who she is. It was really more that it was, to me, consistent with the voice of the narrator, you know?
Yeah, because to you, she was just this cool stepmom.
Yeah. But it's interesting, you know, what you were saying about the internal space of the apartment and all that, and growing up with that, within that kind of climate, or dynamic with the mother, that is sometimes what I think drew me, and I feel like maybe it drew you to the movement world too, is because I'm not sure what your mother was like, but sometimes my husband's a therapist.
Is he really?
And yeah, and we were talking about this the other day because he was, I mean, this is like, it's sort of, you know, it's common, like if the mother's a narcissist, but the child often, it's hard to connect to your own internal stasis, you know, because the needs are all of the other, you know.
Sure.
So your own desires are obscured because you don't really ask for what you want. Like I would never like go cry to my mom as a teenager, have a meltdown like my teenager would, you know.
Right.
Or ask, like, to this day, I would never ask any of my parents for a single bit of advice. You know, I don't even talk to them. But so that said, I think in the yoga connected, and that is going back to that, the beautiful part of yoga, I'm projecting to say you too, to that, what I would call somatics, you know, to where you're actually able to like live in the internal space and see, how does this feel to me? You know, what do I want? Because that was almost like, it was almost very mysterious to me, my own desires or wants before, unless I was then later practicing, and I'd be like, this feels so good to me, like living in that somatic world, you know?
Yeah, that resonates very strongly. I think also my poor mom, her mother is very much a narcissist, just like known narcissist, both her parents. So I think my mom, you know, my therapeutic read is my mom never knew how to ask for those things, and then just kind of passed on this like kind of chaotic state of like, we used to call her Tasmanian devil growing up because she would kind of throw tantrums, spinning around, yelling, and my sister and I would be like, okay, waiting for that to finish. And you know, she's grown a lot, to give her credit. Also, she listens to the podcast. but
Hi, Mom.
But yeah, I think learning to feel safe, like in your own body. I have such memory as a child of feeling, you know, what I look back on is just anxiety. My father was also in a really catastrophic accident when I was 4.5, and my parents divorced that same year. And so he went from being a, as he would say, bipedal person to being in a wheelchair. And he wasn't paralyzed. Everybody always thinks he was paralyzed. He wasn't paralyzed, but obviously that was a huge shift. And when I think of what that must have been like for me as basically a toddler, you know, the world became a very dangerous place all of a sudden. And I was way too young to learn that. And so I remember literally, I mean, this is like, you know, the child psychologists out there can pull out their popcorn bowls. I remember playing, I had one of these little cars that I loved. I still remember that car. I love it so much. It was like this white plastic car with a red seat, and it opened up, and I would like put like my toys in there, and you sit on it with my little toddler legs and like run down, up and down the hallway. And I would go really fast on the hallway, and then I would wreck it, and I would be like, look, I'm just like Dad. And horrify the adults. They'd be like, stop doing that, Cadence.
That's it. Oh my God, that's amazing. Look, I'm just like Dad. Oh my God.
Yeah, I would do that like all the time. You know, smile the brain, trying to make sense of everything.
I love it. I love it.
But yeah, I think that when I try and explain to clients who don't come from any kind of movement background, that that burn that you were talking about earlier can feel so healing, this like deep connection into your own body, and like learning to meet your own needs, especially when you grow up, when people are really struggling to meet your emotional needs and just like struggling to feel safe, I'm sure, themselves and calm themselves, and then they're like 100% not able to do that for you. Being able to be in a yoga class and like connect to your breath and hold a pose, or like literally like find your own fingers around your back, like that is a really amazing feeling to like touch and hold yourself. And that
it really is. And it's so much agency, you know, which is why it's that so complicated when one realizes that some of the teachers are trying to take the agency away, you know. But when taken back, there is so much agency in the practice. And that's what I love about it. That's why I absolutely loathe partner yoga, you know, because I just like, to me, it's such a reprieve and a break from having to perform, you know, for the other. And by perform for the other, I mean even in just a chit-chatty daily conversation. But I tend to also be a performer in the sense that I am entertaining and the show pony. So, and maybe overly concerned about how other people feel. I don't know, you know, not to give some sob story, but I love having to only take care of myself, only think about my own breath, only tend to my own needs on the mat, you know, so to speak. And so when the teacher's like, and now put your back, you know, that's why that Katona yoga, even though I adore Naveen, I think she's an absolute genius, but the Katona yoga, I'm like, kill me now. I'd literally rather like do a jackhammer in the 6 train for a job than having to go into Katona yoga class. They're like 8 people pushing on your body and you have to do them, you know. It's like,
God. Totally, that makes so much sense.
Like when you're, and especially when it's just a class where you're mostly on your own, they're like, okay, now everybody's gonna, I'm just like, I hate even having to open my eyes and look at somebody and be like,
I used to take class with a friend of mine back in the day. We used to take Jillian Turecki's class also. An amazing class.
Great teacher.
And I remember we made it packed going to the class because I told her, I was like, I'm going to that class, and I was like, anything that happens in that class, like you're not there. I was like, I'm gonna sweat, I'm gonna fart, I'm gonna like snot's gonna come on my face. Like I was just like, if I pee my pants, I pee my pants. Like I was just like, we're gonna just go, and I don't want to hear anything about it. And she was like, oh, I'm down. I'm gonna do the same thing. And I was like, great. This is not. I don't want to be looking over at you like, are you having fun? Like
good, so great. Oh my God. Yeah, I know. That's exactly how I feel. I mean, whatever. I'll rise to the occasion if there's a partner here for it. But yeah. And I never understood why I would be so annoyed. And I realized afterwards, that it's like a real, like almost violent interruption of my own internal world,
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, back to the container of like what yoga can be and what a lot of movement practices can be. I've gotten into like running lately, and if you're cycling, it's often that same thing.
Yeah,
you're just kind of engaged in sort of this, there's almost like a monotone or like a drone. I'm just doing this thing. It's semi-repetitive,
Yes.
And even though yoga has all these different postures, like there's that moment in class usually where they're like, okay, we've learned the phrase and now we're just going to do it for these breath cycles.
Yes.
And that's where you can really just like be in yourself and feeling all these things. And that's where I learned as a very anxious, unhappy person to watch my own brain and hear all the terrible things I was saying to myself and be like, oh God, maybe I can just be nicer.
Right.
I think to your point about, what's kind of interesting in that space and when we're younger versus older too is, and when you're coming out of trauma, what Kula taught me is I would be all bendy in all these shapes. And I think it was Jillian who at some point came over and was like, relax your face, like relax your breath.
Right.
And I realized I was in these shapes, like basically hyperventilating and grimacing. And like how interesting, that was how I got through so much of my life. Like just ignoring how I felt and just in a lot of suffering, basically. And she kept coming by and saying, like, relax your face, be breathing. And I realized, either I don't do that posture or I do it and I have to actually literally be at peace. I have to be in the present and I can't just be in this striving where I'm like trying to get my elbow to do for this thing and just like, what am I doing? I pay for this. Like why am I doing that?
It's so funny. So so true. I know. I've been there too. Yeah. And so it's great to have a teacher to guide you into that space,
In your book, there's this incredible tension that builds, and you also jump back and forth in time, which is super interesting. And it adds to, you would think that the time breaks where we see you in the future would kind of make us be like, oh, okay, everything's okay. But I felt this kind of tension building the whole way. Like I really flew through the book because even though I knew that you like lived, because I know you now, I was waiting for this like big catastrophic moment, for the volcano to erupt. And it never does, which I also think is so genius. And it's so real because we're waiting for your relationship with your mother to just sort of like magically resonate or resolve in some way, or like dissolve, or she falls off a cliff and you're left being like last man standing or something. But it just goes back and forth to like your life with her now and your life then and the end where we're still in it.
Like, that's it. Good. I'm glad that you ended up liking that aspect, not hating it. But I really it was very intentional because I'm not really attracted to big resolves. I mean, obviously there's amazing stories that I've read, amazing memoirs, amazing novels where there's huge, resolutions. But that's, definitely not my style. And I'm attracted more to lack of resolution in stories, and a little bit more mysterious and less plot oriented, because we can make any, even when it's nonfiction, one can create a plot, out of something. So I usually get really annoyed when literature shifts to heavy plot oriented things. I mean, it can be entertaining, but if I'm loving a book that's more, let's say what I would call high literature, and then suddenly there's this massive plot thing,
you feel manipulated.
I just like, but that said, I was just being true to the, because I'm different now, obviously, than when I wrote it, but true to that version of me's voice, that narrator's voice, which was that there wasn't a resolve,
I mean, it reminds me actually, do you know the choreographer Terry O'Connor?
I mean, I don't know the stuff well, but
well, he's a delight. You would love him, and he's very funny and super smart. And I took one of his works. I mean, I've done a bunch of his workshops, but a long time ago, he talked about how he grew up as a ballet dancer moving into the modern dance world, and he was really frustrated with the ballet dance class structure where it starts small at the bar, and then you do center work that's slow, and then you do center work that's bigger, and then you start jumping, and then you do the big leaps at the end. And he was like, but this is not how life goes. I don't end every day with big leaps. I don't end every year with big leaps. Like, and he wanted to deconstruct that and start to really, like, his work is very, very interesting, but it reminds me of that, like, pulling apart a narrative structure and being like, you don't always have to be like leaping off the page at the end.
Yes. That's cool. That sounds really cool.
When your book first came out, one of my favorite things you put on social media was your mom's friends terrible reviews.
Yeah, I still miss getting to see that. Unfortunately, then they caught wind and everybody stopped talking about it, and my mom deleted them, but luckily I got the screenshots. Yeah, I like, some of my greatest pleasure in life was opening, because I got off Facebook and had blocked my mother, and so I would go onto my husband's phone and be like, oh yeah, baby, gold mine. Like, when I first started seeing some of those comments from my mother, so my mother, just for your listeners that don't know, has, she's a boomer on Facebook, and people started saying, oh yeah, your daughter's on Fresh Air, this and that, and my mom hadn't read the book yet. I mean, I hadn't even sent it to her, but it was out at this point, or it's just about to come out, and so there started to be this basically like daily dialogue between her and her absolutely psychotic friends, and some of them said to burn the book, and I mean there's such great lines like, I don't know what that book is, but I'd burn it if I got it, or like so many funny people, she just did it for the money. I'm like, okay, you obviously know nothing about the
that's my favorite
publishing
thing.
industry.
As a child of writers, that's my favorite one.
Wow, so much money in there, so much money. Yeah, that's why I'm hawking away at Instagram. I mean, so much funny shit. I mean, there was actually like stuff that I didn't even put on because it was a little bit too dark almost, then getting mad at Terry Gross, saying that she was a cunt, and that I was nervous. It's such good stuff. I wish it was still happening. So then one of the women that I highlighted, one of the commenters, then I guess said to my mom that was happening, big deal, whatever. Not that I would try to hide it. And my mom was like, since you've purloined people's comments for your Instagram, And I was like, well, watch out. Because I actually had people DMing me saying, watch out, that woman's crazy. She started stalking. Like, weird shit was going on, And so I said to my mom, well, watch out. Because I heard, Janice can be dangerous. And then my mom like deleted most of it, but she forgot because one of her posts is just like, well, I don't know, like the actual post, and I don't think she realized that there's a treasure trove of comments underneath, like dozens and dozens of comments.
Well, you have a long history, also for readers that don't know, you have a long history of being very absolutely hilarious, but also like really going after people on Instagram. And my favorite is when you would just put up reels of, they weren't even reels at that point, of, these gross kind of yoga teacher men at some random retreat giving horrible corrections or, holding some pregnant woman upside down or something.
Yeah. That was the fun days. I know. It did take up a lot of time. I do find it truly satisfying and hysterical, and I just really laugh by myself when I used to start like trolling somebody basically. Yeah. But I mean, some people got really upset. I never feel like I was trolling them. I know it's weird to say, but I feel like I was trolling kind of their persona online. Exactly. And if you're gonna put up a picture of yourself giving adjustment, like it's up for grabs. And then I tried when people would personally respond to me to not be cruel, to just like, sometimes respond with sarcasm, but some people would get really, really upset and message me, or their friends would message me, and say that I was, nasty or something. But I actually enjoyed engaging in those dialogues. So I'd be like, well, tell me more. Why? Because this, like Elena Brower's people, and Elena Brower were so mad. But I just think it's so funny because she's, who she is? Yeah. Yeah, she's super famous in that world. I mean, micro famous, whatever. And she's a public persona, like, it's no different than doing an SNL skit when you make fun of it, you know?
Exactly.
So it's so funny they think just because it's has yoga wrapped into it, you know, that you can't make fun of it. And it's literally like, you can't not make fun of it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, and people would be like, this is disgusting, you know, and I was like, so interesting that you know what I mean? Like, imagine being somebody's friend and being like,
Yeah. Another thing that really stood out to me in your book was you writing, and this is actually kind of one of my favorite things that I come upon, and very rarely. Actually, I have a cousin who published a fictionalized memoir that touched on these themes as well. But kind of the lust of a teenage girl, like the sexuality of a teenage girl, which I think just never gets embodied and written about, and like the scenes of you chasing this like much older man. Even though we were like, I'm reading along being like, oh my God, I hope nothing terrible happens. At the same time, you were like craving him, you know? Like,
I wanted him. Yeah, I wanted them for sure. And that was why I kind of, what I was sort of referring to when we were first talking about Me Too, you know? And obviously there's a line that so many men have crossed, and that's deplorable. But I would say that in my stories, you know, it is this murky line where certainly the older men are in territory that's illegal, but that I 100%, even when people say, well, you don't know what you want when you're a kid or whatever, I mean, that's fine, I get that, but I definitely was the pursuer, you know, and the initiator. And in fact, it took a lot of wherewithal and strength, I would say, for like, you know, well, for one of those men to not, you know what I mean? Like, basically my real love, who I still think was my first love, you know, didn't have sex with me. I was a virgin. So I was like, okay, good. You deserve a medal, you know, because I really wanted that to happen. Like, that must have taken a lot of strength, you know?
Yeah.
He got the fuck out of that apartment, you know?
But I think it's just so interesting because we always cast the young woman as the victim and also as totally naive. And it was really interesting to read, like, of course you were naive because you were young, but you also weren't a complete hayseed. I mean, you were living in New York City in the village and running around and seeing a lot, obviously, and experiencing a lot. And you were very much like, you had the hots, like, for real. That
totally. And I think teenage girls, like, obviously depends, and these days things are so different in the sense that there's so much helicopter parenting, and the internet is adds a whole nother element to shit. But in those days, and that, you know, socioeconomic zeitgeist of downtown art world New York, like, we were pretty, I'm going to use the word sophisticated teenagers. Yeah. And by sophisticated, I simply mean that, you know, we were worldly and we had street smarts and we were precocious. And that doesn't mean that we couldn't be taken advantage of it, and we were taking advantage of, some of us. But yeah, I think that I think a lot of teenage girls do have more internal intelligence that we give them credit for, you know? But I think now it's so fucked for teenage girls right now, you know? Well, it's like an epidemic of deep depression and isolation and apparently this is what the social media does to them, you know?
No.
So like, we had that in little snippets in my day, but it's not nowhere near like it was. You know, I was actually pretty confident as a teenager. I feel so bad for the girls now. Oof.
I was actually really shocked to read that you had met your husband when you were so young. I feel like going through your story as a child, I would have expected you to have a long line of different partners.
I know, it's weird.
All stuff, and it's kind of amazing. You know, just do you have a sense of like, I mean, my poor mom, but I have definitely modeled a lot of my behaviors in opposition to the way I saw her behaving, because I saw it hurting her from a really
I think
young
that
age.
is somewhat of what it was unconsciously, you know? I think in the same way that I saw it after yoga, really at a young age, that gave me a sense of security and a therapeutic sense of self, you know, and self-soothing. I think I also sought out that security of a stable relationship, you know? And I'm not saying that, like, my God, when you're in this long of a relationship, there can be plenty of dark times, and has been. But I think I sought out a kind of consistent domesticity, I didn't say that to myself at all, but I see that was working on another plane. That was fueling me from some other plane that I wasn't aware of, which I actually often kind of regret it. I feel like there's a lot of things I feel like I missed out on getting because I was basically married, in my early 20s, living in a house, teaching yoga, while a lot of my friends, I still miss some of these parties they talk about in New York, and there was all these there was a lot of fun shit going on in the mid 90s. Don Hill's and it was weird. I almost acted like I already had kids. Like it was like all this, like I can't leave, it was so weird. And I was, I was pretty straight. I was a vegetarian. I was much more like strictly practicing the moral codes of Vedanta. Yeah, it was weird. But I guess maybe that's what I needed to not spiral out, into some, maybe I would have been an addict or something. Who knows? I was addicted to yoga.
Same. Oh, same. I really was. Yeah, I was like a really no fun vegetarian in college. And then going.
I love the way we pick out vegetarianism as being this awful thing. Sorry, vegetarians. It is better for the world. I know. We're like, we were vegetarians.
You know what I say? I'm just going to be an asshole. When waiters ask my partner and I if we have restrictions, I literally go, no, we're fun.
That's good. I say something like that too, but that's an easier way to say it. I'm going to say that.
No, I had a lot of, I had a lot of rules and restriction, I think, to make the world kind of smaller and easier to handle. And then going into the dance world and there's so much regimentation of like daily class and repetition, literally.
Totally.
And that did feel really like some kind of soothing space.
It did. And we were, and I was attracted to the domineering, the sadistic aspect of many teachers. It did give me a feeling of like regiment. And I was, there was these tight boundaries, of yoga, of that kind of practice that really served me at that time.
I mean, maybe it's a giant leap, but you're making me think in a way we were looking to be mothered. It's like
totally. I really think so. Yes.
Rules. I mean, that's the thing my mom always says. Well, no one could have changed your mind. Like all these kind of moments in my lifetime, and I'm always just like, well, you could have tried.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and, it's so true.
Yeah, and she would say, well, you would fight so much or all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, but kids want boundaries. Like in so many ways, that's what I was asking for. I wanted you to fight back. I wanted.
I know. I still notice that. I did so true. I have to really remind myself of that. And I can see myself sometimes I have a toe in that behavior, like, well, you wouldn't go to bed early, it's like, no, it's me.
Oh yeah, that's a daily excavating phrases that I hear. It's actually gotten a lot better now that we're saying this, but I remember when I was first dating my partner, every once in a while actually a big thing that he's made a request is that I just clearly ask for what I want, which is not anything I ever grew up with. My mom can't.
Yeah, I've been asked that as well.
Yeah. And I do what my mom used to do. It would be really nice if you helped me do this thing. And he would be like, "Is that what you want? Do you want? Could just say it." And oh my God, I literally had to like write down just clear sentence. I mean, I was like, let me just write the grammar of this down. I want you to change the laundry. Like I would have to look.
I know. It's really hard. I know. Really terrifying. Isn't that weird?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's the risk that they say no. Which,
oh my God. Yeah.
He's like, we'll get through it if I'm just like, oh, I can't.
I know. Well, it'll be okay. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, I relate to that so much. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I so appreciated your book. Is there going to be a second one? Because I have ideas.
Yeah, I'm working on it as we speak.
Oh, good.
But it's fiction.
Oh, really?
But yeah, but it's, not fiction. It's fiction. It's auto-fiction.
Oh, cool.
These names are all weird. But don't you have a book coming out?
I am writing a proposal. I hope a book comes out.
Okay, and is it nonfiction? Yes.
Yeah, it's nonfiction.
Is it about movement?
Yeah, it's about movement and yeah, kind of all the things that I talk about. Just like a little bit debunking and a little bit movement itself. And
That's great. I think that's going to be really wonderful. I hope. So you have a proposal that you're shopping around?
no, I'm working on the proposal right now. It's such a weird process.
Oh my
write
God,
about
it's
a
so
book
weird,
that
isn't it?
isn't
Because
written.
I had to write a proposal for my book too.
Yeah. It's totally
Yeah.
weird.
It's really weird. And, so these rules are so random. Like for fiction, you don't write a proposal.
Yeah.
For fiction, you have to have the whole thing. It's so dumb. The whole
Yeah.
publishing industry is crazy. But I'm sure you're going to sell that. And by the way, I love what you say when you post about like body types and just like having fat and stuff. I think that's a thing. I know my friends do too. I have some friends in Philadelphia who follow you. And
Oh, great. Well, I love that.
yeah.
Well, my idea is I wanted you to write about your marriage because I was really struck by this like low key Nick in the background.
Yeah,
Especially in the future scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, who is this peaceful character that like
It's so
flicks
funny.
in and out? And also like was a boundary bit for you and your mom.
Yes,
I'm
that
just,
is
like,
a lot. It is the new one is a lot about that. It's in the guise of it is sort of part two. It's like living in the West Village, but a lot of it has to do exactly with that, with marriage itself.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. So you're definitely. I'm doing what you want.
Good.
But yeah, Nick is really now he's an artist. I mean, he has an MFA from Bard, but he became a therapist over the last few years.
Oh, wow.
And so he's really peaceful now, and he's therapizing. He's shrinking people as we speak downstairs. He's great. He's a really good therapist,
I'm sure he
and
is.
it's very helpful for the marriage. It could be a nightmare, but it seems to be helpful so far.
Great. That's
Yeah.
great. Well, thank you so much for finally coming on the pod.
Thanks so much for being so patient and having me. I'll kiss your feet next time I see you because
You're
I
a
owe
big
you
celeb.
some.
So.
Oh, I wish I was bigger. Somebody pay me. All right, love you.